This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. So South African equities close the week on a rather tepid note, to be honest, barely 1% higher. Now, to some extent, the State of the Nation address is still being passed for its implications on some companies and sectors. MTN, for instance, closed the week nearly 5.9% higher. But to what extent will an auction for spectrum in the fourth quarter of the year really help it out? Vodacom also ending the week barely 2.4% higher. The KN Bourse 4% in the red so far in the year. We expect to start seeing full year earnings for banks to roll in next week. Maybe that might actually provide a bit of a boost to the market. Here's what's coming up tonight. It was long on promise, but pretty short in detail. We'll look at the South African President's State of the Nation address. China is spending at least $11.5 billion in order to fight the coronavirus outbreak. And there's no effort being spared, economic conditions notwithstanding, as lovers impress their partners this Valentine's Day. We'll get to that in a moment, but let's start with some developing news that we're keeping a very close eye on in North Africa. Authorities in Egypt have confirmed the country's first coronavirus case. The country said that the affected person was a foreign national who had been put into isolation in a hospital. The health ministry said in a statement that it had immediately informed the World Health Organization and it has taken all necessary preventative measures. It did not give the nationality of the affected person or any other details. Just to recap on that, Egypt has confirmed its first coronavirus case. The country said that the affected individual is a foreigner who is currently in isolation at a hospital. The health ministry said in a statement it had immediately informed the World Health Organization and it has taken all necessary preventative measures. It has not, however, given the nationality of the affected person or any other details. We'll keep a close eye on that story and bring you the latest as we get it. On to Somalia now, where the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund say the country is eligible for some debt relief. The executive boards of the two Washington-based lenders have approved Somalia's eligibility for the Enhanced Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. Now, to date, debt relief packages under the initiative have been approved for 36 countries. 83% of those, about 30 countries, are right here in Africa. Somalia's outstanding debt load stood at about $5.3 billion in 2018, but the country won't get debt relief just yet. It needs to continue to have a satisfactory performance under an IMF-monitored economic program. It will also have to pay arrears to multilateral creditors and deliver a mutually agreed-to plan to clear them. Now, chaos ensued, and chaos is a bit of an understatement, in South Africa's parliament as an opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, or the EFF, refused to allow President Cyril Ramaphosa to deliver his fourth State of the Nation address. South Africa's third largest opposition party, the EFF, interrupted Mr. Ramaphosa's speech, holding up his address for the better part of an hour. The MPs eventually walked out of the assembly. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela was there.
Ms. Thandi Modise, Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces.
On a point of order, Speaker. On a point of order, Speaker.
What's the point of order?
Can the President please sit down?
Proceedings got off to a chaotic start.
EFF, if they want to engage you, let's go outside and engage outside. Leave this elderly people, let's go and engage outside.
As President Cyril Ramaphosa began delivering his State of the Nation address, he was interrupted by the Economic Freedom Fighters Party MPs.
Please request the clerk to leave this house because it doesn't belong to this house.
Honorable Madam, have you finished?
The opposition MPs embarked on a series of points of order. First, objecting to the presence of apartheid-era President F.W. de Klerk, and then that of Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan. They're blaming Gordhan for failing to effectively preside over crisis-ridden state-owned entities that fall under his portfolio.
A minister of this country, we cannot sit with him. We want to sit with Pravin Gordhan, not here.
Members of other opposition parties were quite incensed with EFF's behavior.
We have now heard the same point of order called over 4 times. Chair, we've also been dealing with these points of order that have been repeated for exactly 50 minutes.
Parliamentary Speaker Thandi Modise then suspended the State of the Nation address proceedings after multiple disruptions from the EFF MPs.
This House is suspended.
And don't come back.
After chanting Pravin must go, the EFF then staged a walkout.
We have said to the President, fire Pravin and fire Pravin now. We have made our point. We can't sit under the same roof with Pravin. We can't sit under the same roof with de Klerk. Cyril Ramaphosa should know that this is going to be our relationship going forward.
When all the jeering by the economic freedom fighters subsided, President Cyril Ramaphosa got on with the business of the day, the State of the Nation address. One of the major issues that he dealt with are the crisis-ridden state-owned entities in this country. Basically informing the nation that it has to deal with the reality of rolling power outages for a while longer.
The reality that we will need to accept is that in order for Eskom to undertake the fundamental maintenance necessary to improve the reliability of supply, load shedding, unfortunately, will remain a possibility for the immediate future. Where load shedding is unavoidable, it must be undertaken in a manner that is predictable and minimizes disruption and the cost to firms and households.
The president reassured South Africans that his government is working to restore Eskom's operational capabilities. Ramaphosa also asserted that his government finds itself at a decisive moment, presented with a definite choice.
We can succumb to the many and difficult protracted problems that confront us, or we can confront them with resolve and determination and with action.
The president's speech also dealt with many other critical issues plaguing the country. Yolisa Njamela for C2N in Cape Town, South Africa.
All right, then, quite a bit to get through in that State of the Nation address, including for us here. Chris Hart is live in Johannesburg tonight for more analysis on that particular address. Chris, good to see you on the programme. So the Rand was up a little bit, almost 0.6% higher from the 14.95 that we saw during the speech, around 14.95. It did pare back some of those gains later on. But given the lack of detail and scepticism around delivery, why would the market see anything positive here?
I think the Rand really was moving around within its volatility limits that we've seen in the last, say, few weeks. So I'm not sure if the actual Rand movement, reflected anything of great significance. I think there were also international factors that also helped nudge the Rand, into a stronger position. And the Rand is also sitting at the weaker edge of the actual trading range of the past few weeks. So I think, if anything, there were no big surprises in the budget, and I think, or the State of the Nation address, and I think that's what, in a sense, gave some relief to the market. But we need to really reflect that the Rand is sitting at a very weak level in any case relative to its recent trading ranges. And a lot of the State of the Nation touched on important issues, like, for instance, youth unemployment. The President spent a bit of time on youth unemployment and power generation in particular. There's a 6-point plan, for instance, in youth to try and bring youth unemployment down, including more money in education, a 1% reallocation of the budget to help create youth employment opportunities, and various things. But if you actually have a look at those 6 points, not one of them actually says bring in investment. How do we attract investment into the economy? Because to bring new economic activity into existence, you have to have investment. And to a large extent, we actually have to also deal with the fact that not only do you need to bring in new investment to bring in unemployment down, to prevent unemployment from rising, you actually have to keep your existing investment. And we've had, for instance, just one of our biggest gold miners, Anglo Gold, shed all their South African assets and shift offshore because South Africa is a drag to them. We need to actually sort out those regulatory things that are actually keeping South Africa back. It's not just regulatory, it's the policy issues that have actually made South Africa uninvestable relative to other countries in the rest of the world.
That being said, though, the speech was pretty short on timelines and specific deliverable economic reform goals. Is that lack of detail in part because there's a budget speech that's due to come in a fortnight on the 26th?
No, I'm not too worried about the lack of detail. The presidential addresses and the State of the Nation addresses tend to be short on detail. It's more to have an overview, and specific details should come from the actual different ministries. The budget is going to be absolutely crucial, but there's nothing in the State of the Nation address that suggested that we're going to actually see different thinking in terms of the budget. It is to see how can we solve our problems with greater state involvement and intrusion. And we've got a problem that the state itself is an incapable state with many disasters on their hands. And we're going to actually see further intrusion in national health. We're facing a huge problem with the actual credit rating in its own right. If we cannot get growth up, we're going to see the downgrades continue. And economic growth and unemployment has to be our national priorities, and you will not get it if we don't actually pare back what I call the three ugly sisters. If we don't pare back over-regulation, over-taxation and rampant corruption, we're going to actually have problems. And the corruption is important because investors, to attract investment, you have to have trust. We haven't seen any top-level corruption cases yet. Apparently there's something in the pipeline, but we have to see it, and investors need to see that corruption is in fact being pared back, and regulation is in fact being pared back. But we're actually going to see more rather than less.
So the president did spend a fair bit of time focusing on energy sector reforms, critical matter, obviously, but do his proposals really go far enough to fix generation capacity issues that we've seen in the sector? Because a lot of the ideas that he's putting forward are things we've known about for years now, but the execution just isn't there.
No, that's part of the problem of the what we call incapable state. The state-owned enterprises really are in a very bad way at the moment, and I think from a point of view of the actual economy, they recognize that energy supply, the reliability and consistency and quality of energy supply cannot be relied on Eskom. So whereas from an ideological point of view, they just can't get over the hump to actually say, let's bring in private investment into Eskom. One of the ways to do it is to bring in independent power producers and actually then have at least some privatization of the supply of electricity. And that's an important thing from the government's point of view, because there is nobody else to blame with the energy malaise that we see at the moment other than government, because they have monopolized that sector. And when we can actually get some private sector players and different players into the market, it will actually enable at least some blame to be spread or success to be shared. And I think that's what we need. We definitely need, for a growing economy, we need a reliable and stable electricity supply.
Indeed. One last question for you, Chris. Mr. Ramaphosa essentially has been in office for the better part of 2 years now, but for us outsiders, for lack of a better word, looking in, there's very little movement towards fixing the things that are holding back South Africa's growth. And the solutions are known, and the frustration's evident to see everywhere with taxpayers and business. What is it that's holding things back? Why isn't the government acting with urgency here?
I think it's the problem is that they've got ideological confusion in terms of how to drive policy. Remember, the important partners which hold an enormous sway in the government is in fact the South African Communist Party, which is really an old-style, ideologically based 1950s style communist party, and a union movement that is similarly that haven't modernized their thinking. And so to actually get these things done, it still means more state intrusion into the economy rather than less. So before anything is fixed, we've got new initiatives coming through. A state bank. The state already has a number of banks. What's the next one going to do that the other state banks haven't done and that the private sector can't do? That was not clear at all. It's just like there's a wish list that within the inbred thinking that you've got in policy making, people say, oh, state bank, and they forget that they already have quite a number. National health, they're going to blunder on. National health alone can actually do more damage than even a nuclear deal can do, because it's a step change in the actual tax burden that we face, which is already, we already are overtaxed, and yet there's no indication that there's a capability in the state to even remotely manage such a system, even with the remotest bit of efficiency. We haven't seen any track record yet. There's a deterioration continuing across the state entities. So national health is looking at a disaster, and then expropriation without compensation is another big policy bomb that they're continuing to actually push instead of trying actually to modify and pull back.
All right, Chris Hart, an economist in South Africa, thank you very much for your time this evening. It's time now for a run through some corporate headlines. Right then, corporate headlines, and we continue with our focus on South Africa. The Labour Court over there has dismissed an urgent application by the country's unions to stop retrenchments at South African Airways. NUMSA and the South African Cabin Crew Associations want to stop SAA from laying off workers as part of its turnaround strategy. SAA, however, is desperate to cut costs. In the last few months, the carrier has cancelled dozens of local, regional and international flights. At the same time, the central bank in South Africa started the process of appointing an advisor to manage it on the sale of its 50% stake in a small lender, African Bank. The lender is looking to dispose this stake within 18 to 24 months. African Bank was hived off from its listed parent, African Bank Investments, and placed under the South African Reserve Bank control in 2014 after nearly collapsing under the weight of some pretty bad loans. Elsewhere in the auto sector, Renault has turned in its worst financial performance in a decade in 2019. The French car maker reported net losses of about $152 million last year due to lower sales volumes and a falling contribution from its also ailing Japanese partner, Nissan. It now says its outlook for 2020 is pretty bleak, with a fresh fall in operational profitability expected. Renault and Nissan, this alliance partners, have been rocked by the fallout from the scandal involving their former joint chair, Carlos Ghosn. And the Royal Bank of Scotland is going to be changing its name to NatWest in a major shake-up. The Edinburgh-based bank, commonly known as RBS, is one of the retail banking subsidiaries of the Royal Bank of Scotland group, together with NatWest and Ulster Bank. Now, later this year, it will phase out the RBS brand and launch a new strategy focused entirely on NatWest, which accounts for roughly 80% of total revenues. That's a run through your headlines. We're about 20 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business. Here's what's coming up next. Egypt's central bank will help waive some business loans to revive companies affected by the 2011 unrest. And environmentalists in Uganda calling for a total ban on single-use plastics. Their arguments are coming up shortly.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Now, Egypt's trade ministry says that an estimated 5,000 factories have shut down since the 2010 unrest and the political and economic fallout that followed. This in turn has led to a significant drop in output levels. Egypt's central bank now has rolled out a plan to help restructure and reopen these factories. CGTN's Yas Hakim now explains.
The government has been working hard to attract foreign investors and encourage local businessmen to establish new companies. However, most of the investments have poured into real estate, services, tourism and oil and gas sectors. Investments in production and industrialization have been minimal, hence the intervention by the Central Bank of Egypt.
The bank targets to pump 100 billion Egyptian pounds to support 5,000 factories and companies that have defaulted. The banks are meeting with business owners to discuss each case. Debts have been waived for some, interest to debts for others, while giving them the green light to receive new loans to buy raw materials or equipment to resume production.
So far, legal cases against 91 indebted factories have been dropped. The CBE has so far waived about $3.3 billion in debts, and new funding has been pumped into 78 stalled factories. This move has been welcomed by the business community.
It's excellent, a good step. We endured a tough time. Investors were the victims of uprising and terrorism. Now that this is behind us and we have settled down, it's time to look at producers and provide them with the necessary support they deserve.
However, there is a certain criteria for manufacturers to be given this second chance by banks.
In order to benefit from the central bank initiative in debt forgiveness is the ability of the customer to repay part of this debt, and of course it will be waived from the interest borne on the facility itself. And we usually at the bank study the reasons behind the failure or the default for such clients. We study what is the factors behind this, such as market problems and so on, marketing problems and so on and so forth.
The types of producers that have so far benefited are from the pharmaceuticals, textiles, building material and food production.
Will have a very big impact of a big part of the manufacturing sector in Egypt, especially in the medium and small-sized companies, to recover and to move on, and also to motivate medium and small-sized enterprises to move on and to complete the journey of manufacturing in Egypt.
Reopening factories will raise production, create jobs, increase exports and revenue for the country. After finishing off with the industries, the central bank will move to protect the tourism sector. It will be providing similar financial support to tourism companies and hotels that have been affected since 2010. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, taxi-hailing firms in Kenya are voicing their protest against a raft of proposals by regulators in this market, specifically the National Transport and Safety Authority. It plans to, among other things, cap commissions at 15% of fares. Now, they say that move essentially threatens their earnings. The three main players in the ride-hailing app space in Kenya, Uber, for instance, arguably the largest in that space, charges a commission of about 20 to 25%. Bolt charges 20%. Little, on the other hand, charges about 19% of the fair value. So let's dig a little deeper into what these proposals will imply for the ride-hailing market in Kenya. Olaoluwa Akinusi is the country manager for Bolt here in Kenya. He's with me in studio right now. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ramah. Thanks for having me.
What are your initial impressions of these rules? Because it's a fairly sizable document, about 30 plus pages.
Yeah.
What do you make of it?
Okay, I think fundamentally for us as an industry, we consider this as a level of growth for us to get to a place where we're having this conversation, right? But with the significance of growth, or with the fact that growth is being discussed now, which is eroded by the regulations, there's also the part where the regulations that need to happen should not necessarily stifle the growth. They should, on the other hand, actually enable the growth to move from one level to the other, which is the conversation happening now.
But do these regulations put you out of business? So let me put the context of why I'm asking that question.
Okay.
On one hand, it's capping commissions at 15%, right, of the fair number. But at the same time, it's also limiting the working hours for driver partners or contractors, as it were, to around 8 hours. Now, on one hand, that implies that if you keep prices where they are, revenues are going to fall, inevitably, assuming that the amount of driver partners in circulation remains the same.
Okay.
Alternatively, if revenues are to go up, you'd have to raise prices, which is a very unpalatable prospect for you guys. So would this put you out of business?
Well, so I think the first thing to mention is, as a business, Bolt is very much pro-regulations. We embrace it. As I said earlier, it's about having the conversation around ensuring the regulations are proportionate and they basically enhance or help to grow the business further or the industry further. Now, in answering the question directly, it's not very much about putting us or any other player out of the business. It's more from a place of ensuring that there's good clarity or there's good understanding of the regulations and whatever items that whatever items are contained in the regulations.
But this, at least at face value, this is pretty clear. 15%, 8 hours a day.
So for 15%, for instance, it's one of the questions one would ask is, how did the 15% come about? So for each of the platforms, I'm sure there's some level of mechanics around how they decide whatever commissions they want to come up with. So it's a question we're posing to NTSA or to any of the regulatory bodies to say, okay, how did you come about in terms of the mechanics for achieving the 15% mark that you're discussing? So it's more about getting clarity on that. In terms of the hours of working of drivers, I mean, it's mostly an industry that prides itself in allowing drivers to basically work at times that they want to work, because it's about the gig economy, right? So for that, I mean, it's not much of a question of increasing the hours or reducing the hours, but basically just understanding what led to these specific figures that are being pushed around.
But let's assume this goes ahead, and you've seen this happening in this country, because case in point, the Huduma number issue, right? Government comes up and says, we're implementing something, right? Virtually no industry inputs, they don't listen to anyone, they just implement it and go straight out. Would you survive with these sort of regulations in place?
Well, because there are a number of components to the industry, right? There's a part where the drivers are also stakeholders, there's a part where the riders are stakeholders, and then the platforms. So I think it's mostly going to be a general question around what would the industry be like post this kind of regulations. But for us, we're not looking at it in that manner. We're looking at it more, for us, when I say for us, I mean Bolt. We're looking at it more as a scenario where the government wants to regulate the sector, which is perfect, and we're pro-regulations. But now the conversation around that happening is the stage we're in, and then that's the stage we're focused on ensuring that we're able to move forward from there in the best possible way for the sake of the industry.
All right. The sector, however, is also under attack from a different perspective, because I read these regulations, these draft regulations that are coming in, and I look at the Finance Act that's currently in place, the one that was approved by the presidential assent in November, and that had a clarification, according to KRA, that basically said they're looking to also tax income that accrues from digital platforms. These draft proposals then come along and say that you must be locally incorporated, and the applicable laws governing contracts and operations is Kenyan legislation. How does this change your tax obligations here?
Okay, well, to a good extent, I mean, the company is a legally established company in Kenya, and then based on the present requirements of law, either from a tax angle or from any other angle, the company is 100% compliant. On that scenario, I think it's mostly also a part where we need to have that conversation around understanding what the new kinds of tax clauses or whatever other kinds of tax revenues the government or KRA is looking at achieving, and then ensuring that we give our inputs to achieve a scenario where we remain as a business and we're able to exist as a profitable business, and then still also be able to continue to support the government in either revenue generation as tax-paying, as a tax-paying organization, or in any other way that we're able to ensure that the economy grows.
All right. We'll leave it there for the time being. Oluwalua Akinosi, Country Manager for Bulletin Kenya. Thank you very much.
Ramah.
Appreciate it. All right then, you're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. China's allocated $11.5 billion to fight the coronavirus epidemic. And only for the second time in the country's history, there are more women in the American workforce than men. We'll explore how he got there next.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. Egypt has confirmed its first coronavirus case. The country said that the affected person was a foreign national who had been put into isolation at a hospital. The health ministry said in a statement that it had immediately informed the World Health Organization and it had taken all necessary preventative measures. It did not, however, give the nationality of the affected person or any other details. Elsewhere, international flights over Nigeria and Ghana have been severely disrupted due to bad weather conditions, which are hampering visibility. Now, the dry and windy spell, popularly known as a harmattan, it's essentially a dust storm common in that side of the world, is causing quite a bit of travel chaos, with more flights due to be disrupted in the days to come. The Nigerian government, in the meantime, has introduced a new visa policy that seeks to put into action the Africa Free Trade Agreement that was signed last year. According to a spokesperson of the Immigration Department, the new rules will spur integration and economic growth. Under this new policy, Africans who are looking to travel to Nigeria can now apply for specific visas, which include short visits, temporary visits, and even permanent stays. And finally, innovators in Uganda have designed a portable ultrasound scanner for pregnant mothers. The maternal mortality rate in Uganda is among the highest in the world. But many risk factors during pregnancy can be detected through ultrasound scans. The main problem up until this point has been affordability. That's a run through your headlines. China's pooled $11.5 billion in emergency funds to deal with the coronavirus outbreak. Now, the State Financing Guarantee Fund will also cut premiums for institutions in seriously affected areas in half. At the same time, China's central bank has issued preferential interest rate loans to support the battle against this particular pathogen. Interest rates on these loans range from 2 to 3.2%. The China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission has also urged banks to be lenient in dealing with loans taken out by SMEs that have been affected by this outbreak.
By February 13th, the country's finance sector had set up an 80.5 billion RMB emergency fund, including 1 billion RMB for epidemic prevention and treatment in Hubei province, 4.4 billion RMB for subsidies in treating patients and supporting medical workers, and 9.95 billion RMB to boost basic public health services and prevention and control of the epidemic across the country.
We have issued 4 notices with a total of 9 policies to reduce corporate taxes and expenses. Logistics companies' revenues generated from delivering emergency supplies will be exempt from value-added tax. Courier companies' revenue generated from delivering daily necessities for residents will also be exempt.
Many restaurants and retail shops in China have been hit hard by the coronavirus outbreak. As of this morning, at least 1,384 people had died. All of them but 3 are in China. To stay afloat, some enterprises have come up with ways to try and minimize their losses. CGTN's Daniel Allen Bay has more.
Work stoppages continue across China, with many people at home losing precious, hard-earned money. The restaurant business has suffered a huge hit since the Lunar New Year holiday.
Indeed, our business has been affected. We have closed most of our stores in Beijing. The closure means a big decline in our profit. We have so much raw food material stuck in stock. We thought there will be a large amount of orders during the Spring Festival.
Faced with these problems, they have to come up with efficient ways to survive. Chen says she is prepared for the worst and believes business will get better with the right efforts.
For example, our employees are allowed to get temporary jobs at other companies through the employee sharing scheme. We work with some online delivery platforms to send out our dishes. We sell our food materials both online and offline to local communities.
But these measures may not be enough to ease financial pressure on restaurant operators. The Beijing government recently rolled out a slew of measures to support small and medium-sized enterprises.
Actually, these measures have in 2 ways. First, they will enable business to get guarantee loans much more easily. Most restaurants don't have too much cash flow and rely mostly on bank loans. Secondly, the measures will allow restaurant owners to apply for a reduction in tax and rentals for tenants.
Zhao says businesses must prove that they are suffering a financial loss to qualify for the benefits according to the new measures. But experts say the restaurant business won't suffer for long, saying people will be eager to go out and eat again once the virus is a memory. Daniel Bay, CGTN.
In the meantime, in the United States, this coronavirus outbreak is also affecting businesses, although the country has only confirmed 15 cases so far, and one of them has been cured. The impact most notably is on a number of Chinese enterprises. CGTN's Dan Williams reports from Chicago.
Chicago's Chinatown, situated a few kilometres south of the city's downtown, has enjoyed major growth over the last few decades, becoming a major tourist attraction in its own right. But over the last few weeks, business has slowed significantly. Although the epicentre of COVID-19 is half a world away, fear of the coronavirus has drastically cut visitors here, and that has left business owners counting the cost.
Coronavirus impacted Chinatown a lot.
Tony Hu is a well-known celebrity chef whose chain of restaurants have been awarded numerous prizes.
The virus killed every business, especially Chinese restaurant business. In Chinatown is a big hit.
Restaurant owners are looking to fight back, organising a Love Chinatown campaign. But the impact is already clear.
Chinatown area is very bad. Like a little bit outside about Chinatown, a little bit better. Like a Chinatown area, I think we lose like 50% business.
Fears about COVID-19 in Chicago accelerated after the city saw the first confirmed US case of person-to-person transmission. But the husband and wife, both in their 60s, have since recovered and been discharged from hospital. And despite fears the virus would spread, the city has yet to record a further case.
Chicago and Illinois health officials are also attempting to allay fears, organising a news conference to persuade locals that the risk to the general public remains low.
Please do not allow stigma, xenophobia, or fear to control your decisions. Chinatown and all of Chicago is open for business.
If that doesn't work, and if there is a further scare locally, then Tony Hu says many restaurants will struggle to continue.
I'm so sure if they keep like this 2 or 3 more months, a lot of restaurants, a lot of people will have big problems. The bill is high, everything is high. Now, every restaurant faces problems. How can you pay the bill on time?
Many here are deeply concerned about the devastation of the virus in China and hoping for the good of all that COVID-19 runs its course quickly. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
Staying with the United States, for only the second time in the country's history, the number of women in the American workforce has outnumbered that of men. It happened in December. Here's CGTN's Karina Huber with the latest.
Miriama Rabukawaga has been an emergency medical technician, or EMT, for 3 years. She works with Ambulance, an independent company that provides affordable transportation services to people in need, mainly seniors. The majority of EMTs are male. Ambulance is no exception. Only about 40% of their workforce is female. Rabukawaga says some patients question whether she can handle the heavy lifting required, especially when she works with a petite female colleague of hers.
So we'd always get like a lot of stares and a lot of questions like, are you sure you guys can handle this? Do you think you could call another unit or another crew? And we're like, no, trust me, we got you.
There are now more women than men in the U.S. workforce for only the second time in U.S. history. The last time was in 2010 after the global financial crisis. In December, women held more than 50% of U.S. payroll jobs. Of the 145,000 added jobs that month, women got 139,000 of them.
The numbers reflect the fact that industries traditionally dominated by women, like healthcare and education, are growing faster than sectors that typically attract men, like construction and manufacturing.
Experts say the growth in healthcare is driven by demographics. Baby boomers, one of the largest generations, are now approaching old age.
With an aging population, we have new and more complicated and different healthcare needs. So whether it's home healthcare, attendance, or physical therapy for people who are increasingly and continuing to be active, the fact is that we need medical professionals to help us age gracefully and with dignity.
The trend is also being driven by the fact that a growing number of women are getting college degrees.
I think this is a better time than ever for women who are either beginning their careers or navigating midway through their careers.
Rabukawaga can attest to that. She says the number of female co-workers at Ambulance is growing rapidly. Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Quick run through commodity prices for you. So palladium, it's part of the platinum group of metals. It's a breakneck rise, and one that we saw last year. It seems to slow down a bit in February, relatively speaking. It's treading water around the $2,400 an ounce mark. But even at those levels, it's still 24% higher this year alone, and we're barely halfway into Q1. Iron also having a rather interesting week, especially given the coronavirus outbreak in China that has raised concerns about how supply chains will be affected. Oil prices were up about 7% this week at the Dalian Commodity Exchange. Brent crude prices still relatively depressed, $56.88 at 17.17 GMT. Here's what's coming up next. We'll swing into a little more positive note. We're seeing no effort spared as lovers impress their partners this Valentine's Day. All that and more is coming up shortly. Welcome back. Environmentalists in Uganda are demanding a total ban on single-use plastics. They say the partial ban that has been implemented by the government over 10 years ago is simply not effective. Now, an increasing amount of plastic waste does continue to find its way into the environment, despite that law being present for over a decade. Here's UTN's Hilary Eyesiga with this report.
Marching against pollution. Worldwide Fund is leading the campaign. They want a plastic-free environment.
91% of plastics produced are never recycled. So that simply means that they end up in our environments, in the soil, in freshwater sources, and in the ocean. So statistics right now are showing us that 25% of the fish that we eat has plastic in their guts. That should worry me and you.
Statistics from Kampala City Authority show that 51% of plastic garbage in the city is left uncollected. In 2007, the government issued a partial ban on non-biodegradable plastics.
We already have a law that bans certain microns of plastic from being used. This law has been challenged by implementation, and we are calling back the government, we are calling back the parliamentarians that they should give us all the necessary support so that the enforcement of this law is done.
Lax enforcement means most drainage channels in Kampala City get clogged with plastics. This causes occasional flash floods in the city whenever it rains. They now want this law reviewed. Activists here are pushing for a ban on single-use plastics. They believe this is the only way to save the environment. And the government now plans to take action.
We are also looking at if the management cannot be done as well as we have tried out. We are going to push for a total ban of certain microns from the market, and this has happened even in our neighboring countries.
Rwanda and Tanzania have since issued a total ban on polythene bags. They are encouraging plastic recycling, and through such initiatives, campaigners hope to achieve a smaller plastic footprint. Hilary Eyesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
So then, how much would you, actually that's the wrong question to ask, how much have you spent already on Valentine's Day? Despite years of subpar growth and unemployment at record levels of 29%, South Africans are still going all out to show the special people in their lives just how much they mean to them. CGTN's Julie Shire has that story.
The Valentine's Day spending frenzy is a boom for confectionery and flower businesses despite a tough economy. With love in the air, chocolates, roses and hearts are the order of the day.
People use this day to show affection to their loved ones, and these chocolates seem to do the trick.
So for me, I think it's lost its sort of moment of celebrating with loved ones, you know, because you go to a restaurant on Valentine's night and it's so busy and it gets so expensive. So I always come buy my kids like a little chocolate and my husband a chocolate, but that's about the most celebration we do on Valentine's Day.
For others, red roses remain the language of romance. Despite hefty price tags, requests have been flooding in for this startup florist run from a modest garage in Johannesburg.
My biggest order is 100 roses. I think every girl gets excited to be getting 100 roses. So I think she'll be very excited.
There may be fancy dinners and romantic getaways planned for later in the day, but most couples will be waking up to romantic spoils.
Valentine's Day is a very nice day where we have to show love to our partners. We have to celebrate it. It renews our love with our loved ones to show them how much we love them, how deeply we love them from our hearts.
It's the most profitable time of the year for those in the flower industry, but some consider it a labor of love.
I hope my customers or whoever's receiving the flowers is happy. I hope they love it. I hope it gives them a smile. I hope that it gives them a sense of, happiness.
The spirit of love is very much alive in South Africa, and Valentine's Day is a chance to celebrate what's most dear in people's lives. Julie Shard, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, for entrepreneurs like Joy Armitage, Valentine's Day often means some pretty decent revenue through the door. Her love for flowers started at a pretty early age, and today her business supplies a broad range of flowers to a range of retail and wholesale clients across South Africa. CGTN's Angela Coppola has her story on Grassroots tonight.
Not only has Joy grown the business, but she's also created employment for the local community. She now has a staff of 21 workers, with 50% of them staying on the farm.
We started off with just the container, a 12-foot container as a storage unit, and we used to grade underneath the trees, and we had the one shade netting where we just grew the seasonal flowers. Then we started importing from Zimbabwe and from Kenya and buying from other farms around the country.
Today they supply to a wide range of retail and wholesale outlets across the Western Cape, including Woolworths and Spar. The business model is fairly conservative. Their infrastructure is portable and land ownership isn't an issue.
And all of that on the back of, we used to be Zimbabwe farmers, so we're all a little bit gun shy. So it's all about making it happen from year to year and keep the growth under control, managing the growth to make sure that we can still grow the business and not have anything solid in the ground.
An integral part of their success is that the staff are encouraged to follow their dreams.
I'm finding it very interesting working here. I'm happy to be here. The environment is quite conducive. I'm being honored. I feel being honored, because as you look at me, I'm quite young. I'm not that old.
When I come here, I was know nothing. But when in 3 months, they teach me how to do the things, how to do everything. Then I learn everything from here. From the first time, it was not easy. Because as a general worker, I have to do everything for general worker. It was not easy for me.
Entrepreneurs can't operate in silos. They need support, and they need a solid support base around them. But first of all, they need a passion for the business and an understanding of how to make a profit out of it.
I love business, and it's so awesome to be in it, especially in flowers, because it just brings so much happiness. And it's a lovely opportunity to be able to give and make people happy.
I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, in China, some singles enjoyed a bit of relief this Valentine's Day. This comes as the coronavirus outbreak has hit brick and mortar businesses that capitalize on this holiday fairly had. CGTN's Chen Tong has the latest.
With few love-struck couples strolling around outside, many of this year's Valentine's dates have moved inside and onto the internet.
我发现你最近变重了耶。不，因为你在我心里的地位越来越重了。
In a Valentine live stream in this flower shop at Shanghai's Xintiandi, bloggers are teaching romantic expressions to their online audience, hoping to arouse some Valentine atmosphere at this special time.
This Valentine's Day is pretty special. Many people have moved their days from offline to online. The live stream can bring together couples who are in different places. My audience is also much more. Most of them are students and white-collar staff working from home.
Of course, the flower shop was hoping all the online romance could save its business from the epidemic. 60% of its flower sales during previous Valentine's Days came from its brick and mortar store. But of course, that revenue dried up this year. The live stream did help. By the time it ended last night, the shop had sold 120 bouquets via the live stream platform. Though that was still less than half the sales for last year's Valentine's Day, it was still something.
Our offline sales have dropped a lot because of the epidemic.
so we've been promoting online activities. I think online influencers can get us more attention on the internet to boost our sales both offline and online.
While the flower shops were hoping the live stream could help boost the orders, entertainment companies have been betting on cloud dating to get their audience back. Shanghai's TZ House used to hold concerts every Valentine's Day, but this year they are offering an online singing performance tonight. If the cloud concerts succeed, the company is expected to try more in the future.
The audience can share love stories via live streaming and order songs for their boyfriends or girlfriends. These cloud dates will be the start of our online shows, and we're planning more for the future.
Because of the coronavirus, some cities in China have also suspended marriage registrations. But as long as it's true love, every day is Valentine's Day. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Finally, I know the 14th of February is often more focused on trying to get you to spend some more. But it's also a good opportunity to strengthen your financial commitments to your partner or to show yourself some love by increasing your financial security.
It's a time to step back and talk with your partner about what your long-term goals are with your money. Because if you can get on the same page, it's easier to plan and to make sure you meet those goals. So it's a really good idea to set aside time when you're not rushed, you're not busy, and you both know you're going to talk about your money goals. And then think about what are you good at with money? Where do you need to improve? What do you want to do with your money, whether it's going on a vacation or maybe saving more, making a down payment on a house one day, whatever those goals are, you want to make sure you get on the same page with your partner.
We'll run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. So the rand, as we mentioned at the start of the hour, was essentially up 0.6% at one point in today's trading session, but it was barely 0.4% higher much later in the day. At 17.12, in fact, it was around 14.9 to the dollar. So the question still remains, did the president do enough to reassure markets that there's at least a clear plan that might be executed to fix the many problems ailing South Africa? As we heard earlier in the hour, arguably not. But a clearer set of answers may emerge on the 26th of February when the budget speech is delivered by the Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on this program in the course of the hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us